Well, I'm here again with Tim Stratton, and in this video I wanted to hone in a little bit more as to the name of his ministry, FreeThinking Ministries, why he chose that name, and also give him a chance to explain the primary argument that he's known for. There's been something that he's been working on for years, and just recently got a chance to co-author a paper with J.P. Moreland.
That's right.
On this particular argument. So in this video I want to give Tim a chance to explain that. But first, FreeThinking Ministries, that seems like a strange name for a Christian apologetics ministry. How did you come up with that name?
Well, for those that have seen the first video that we did together, and have seen that backstory, kind of the origin story of how Tim Stratton got into apologetics, you'll see that a lot of these atheists that I was interacting with, they called themselves free thinkers.
Yeah, that's common.
Right, yeah. And in fact, in my community of Kearney, Nebraska, there was a local chapter, and it was very big on the UNK campus, and they called themselves the Free Thinkers. And this atheist group that was very evangelical, if you will. And they were going after the students in my youth group and in the college group. And I started interacting with them, asking them questions, trying to understand their view, trying to see why they believed that God didn't exist. And one of the things that kept coming up over and over again, this is between 2008 and probably 2010, was the fact that they did not believe that we had free will. Now at the time...
The atheists didn't believe.
The atheists didn't think we had free will. Now at the time, I kind of agreed with them because I was a Calvinist who would affirm theological determinism or divine determinism. I mean, I was exhaustive about it. I called it exhaustive divine determinism.
Okay.
And I was a 5-point Calvinist who also even went further and said God determines everything. But I don't hold that view anymore, and I'll explain why in a bit. But really, it started because these atheists were saying that they didn't think we had free will. But their reasons for thinking that is because they thought we were purely physical and material. There was no immaterial soul or supernatural aspect of the human existence. There's no God or anything like God. They were what we call robust naturalists. And really that means only the physical, material universe exists. There's no immaterial thinking things. And so if matter and physical stuff is all that exists, it stands to reason that everything that exists, at least everything about humanity, is determined by the laws and events of nature.
Sure.
So even if one thought that quantum indeterminacy was true, still everything about the human being would be determined by the laws and events of nature. And so,
which is really ironic to be, to not believe in free will and yet to call your group free thinkers.
that's right. Yeah, that's exactly what hit me as I was interacting with these folks. I'm like, well, wait a second. You call yourself a free thinker, but then you say there's no free will, and it just occurred to me that if there's no free will, there's no free thinking. And then it hit me that, well, wait a second. If there is such a thing as an immaterial soul, which I believed to be true because of my Christian beliefs, I thought if there is an immaterial supernatural soul, then that would be something that would not be determined by the laws and events of nature.
Okay.
And so that's where the thought process started. And then I thought, well, wait a second. Christians have more right to the term free thinker than atheists do. So I thought, I'm going to take that name back and start a ministry called FreeThinking Ministries.
At least non-Calvinistic Christians. So maybe you should explain how, because you said at first, as a Calvinist, you didn't believe in free will, but then it sounds like in your journey, when you moved away from Calvinism, then you did affirm that humans have free will?
Yeah, not just a free will, but what we call a libertarian free will. And so an event is determined if prior conditions are sufficient to necessitate that event.
Okay.
Now, determinism typically means that antecedent or prior conditions are sufficient to necessitate all events. And so then what I call exhaustive divine determinism, it's slightly redundant, but I use the word exhaustive to really highlight, I'm talking about everything, not just your actions, but also your thoughts, that God would provide the antecedent conditions, either in his decree or what he creates, that are sufficient to necessitate all events about humanity, including all of your intuitions, all of your thoughts, all of your sins, all of your desires, all of your wants, and ultimately all of your beliefs. So I'm really going after that view that all things about humanity are determined by prior antecedent conditions, whether those are physical or just simply natural or supernatural.
God.
And God, yeah, and I think exhaustive determinism, to be redundant, but to make my point, is false, and for some good reasons.
Okay, so you came to the conclusion that we do have free will and have, a lot of good reasons and evidence to back up that position. So then maybe, I'm assuming you start then with, you have this phenomenon, humans who have free will, and then maybe you ask, what's the best explanation for us having free will? Atheism or Christian theism, perhaps?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's really hard, I think, to make sense of this libertarian free will. And so I define determinism. Let me quickly say, what do I mean by libertarian free will? Mm-hmm. Well, if determinism, or if an event is determined, if antecedent prior conditions are sufficient to necessitate the event, then I would say, well, we can apply this to thinking. And then so one possesses libertarian freedom, the libertarian freedom to think, if antecedent conditions are insufficient to necessitate their thought or rational belief. So so we're basically looking at prior conditions being sufficient or insufficient to determine all of the person's thoughts and beliefs. Now, what was your question?
So so you're interacting with these atheists, mm-hmm. and you've come to the conclusion that free will, we do have free will.
Oh, yeah.
But these atheists, they deny free will, mm-hmm. yet call themselves free thinkers. So then how do you take your, belief in free will and use that to argue against the atheists that you were interacting with?
Yeah. It's hard to, like I said, it's hard to make sense of this libertarian free. It seems to be a supernatural power, and I do think it is a supernatural power that we have because we are created in the image and the likeness of a supernatural God. Sure. So I think that view of libertarian freedom, this supernatural power, fits in nicely with the Christian worldview, but it doesn't fit nicely with the most popular atheistic view, namely robust naturalism. Okay. So all naturalists are atheists, but not all atheists are naturalists. But it is a very common view. I would say it's the most common view of atheism that I run into is this robust naturalistic view. So when I went to Biola University, I started working on this argument in 2012. And it started out, I just basically wrote down two premises and a conclusion. So a nice little syllogism here. And I wrote down, I remember I was in Scott Smith's classroom, and he was talking about something, distantly related. And I stopped listening to him, sorry, Dr. Smith, and started scribbling down a syllogism on my notes. And I wrote down, if humanity does not freely think in the libertarian sense, then humanity is never epistemically responsible. And then I wrote down, but humanity is occasionally epistemically responsible. That just seemed obvious, and to argue against that would seem to assume it. And so then the conclusion just says, well, therefore, humanity freely thinks in the libertarian sense. That means that you are a free thinker. You have free will, libertarian free will to think. That means something or someone else is not causally determining all of your thoughts and beliefs. Mm-hmm. Now that goes against what I used to believe. In fact, Paul Helm, one of the world's leading Calvinist philosophers today, says that our thoughts, every twist and turn of our thinking is under the direct control of God. Mm. And the atheist, Sam Harris, is going to say, every twist and turn of your thoughts leading to all of your beliefs is determined by prior natural conditions. Physics and chemistry, unthinking, non-rational, or non-thinking things.
We're just robot machines, basically.
Yeah, that aren't programmed by. On the naturalistic view, we're not programmed by an intentional. We're not intentionally programmed, right? It's just whatever physics and chemistry does turns out thoughts and beliefs. But I think the problem is worse for Christians who deny this libertarian freedom, and I'll get into that soon. But with that syllogism in mind that I just gave you, I then expanded that. I added a couple premises to the argument and got a couple more conclusions, deductive conclusions from it. So that one goes like this. I say, premise 1, if robust naturalism is true, then God or things like God do not exist. I think it was Alvin Plantinga that said, one way we can define naturalism is just saying, well, God or things like God do not exist. And the human soul then would be too much like God for the naturalist, at least the robust naturalist, to make sense of that in his worldview. So that's premise 1. If robust naturalism is true, then God or things like God do not exist. That's pretty non-controversial. Premise 2 says if God or things like God do not exist, then humanity does not freely think in the libertarian sense. And that's just basically saying, look, if physics and chemistry is all there, it's just purely physical, the physical universe is all that exists, then everything about the human is determined by physics and chemistry. And so the laws and events of nature, these are non-thinking things. So we're not freely thinking. We seem to be determined by these laws and events of nature, by physics and chemistry. The next premise would go like this. If humanity does not freely think in the libertarian sense, then humanity is never epistemically responsible. I think that's pretty non-controversial as well. If something or someone else, or in this case, if something else is determining how I think, then it's hard to make sense of me saying that I am responsible for the thoughts in my head. Something else is.
And that's basically what you mean with the term epistemically. Is that what you mean when
Yeah.
you say epistemically responsible? You're not talking about moral responsibility per se, but what kind of responsibility are you talking about with that epistemic?
Yeah, so epistemology is the study of knowledge. And so really I'm trying to get at here our intuitions, what's going on in our minds when we think, our intuitions, our thoughts, our reasoning processes, ultimately all these things that are deliberations and evaluations and judgments, all of these things, if they're not up to me, that means they're up to something else. And so then I'm looking at, okay, well, what's it up to? If it's physics and chemistry, fizzing and popping, physics and chemistry are not thinking things. They're irrational, right? They're non-rational. And so if I'm going to say that these are responsible for my thoughts and beliefs, then it seems to me that we're not. If I'm going to say my rationality is dependent upon non-rational things, I think that's a problem. And I think most people will see that that's a problem.
Similarly, I guess, when we talk about moral responsibility, if you're not responsible for your own moral actions, then you can't really be blamed for them. So similarly, I guess with this epistemic responsibility, if you didn't have epistemic responsibility, you wouldn't be responsible for your beliefs.
Right.
That you would blame them, if you will, on something else, our chemistry, our DNA, our nature, nurture, but you wouldn't be responsible for what you believe because it was determined by something or someone else, right?
That's exactly right.
Okay.
Now, you bring up moral responsibility. I think that it's hard to make sense of human moral responsibility if we are not previously epistemically responsible.
True.
That's why I think most pastors and theologians refer to the age of accountability, which is this is the age where you can start to reason and be epistemically responsible. And since you can reason at a certain age, now you're morally responsible. But maybe that's a topic for another video.
Yeah. So finish walking me through then your famous or your well-known free-thinking argument then, and what is it, how does it conclude in, because I think it's an argument for the existence of God, right? Mm-hmm. How does it get to, we do have free will, and then how does it conclude then with this conclusion that there is a God?
Yeah. So I've given you 3 premises so far. We've got one more premise, and it's the turning point of the argument. And it simply says, premise 4, humanity is occasionally epistemically responsible. Now, if somebody is going to deny that, think about what that means. And if another human comes up to you and says, no, there's no human that's epistemically responsible, well then, what are they? That's self-defeat. They're saying that they're not even responsible for that belief.
Yeah.
And so then you have to say, well, what is responsible for your belief? Something non-rational. Okay, well, why should we think that's any good?
Why should we listen to what your belief says or your belief forming mechanism creates?
Exactly. Now, most people want to affirm that they are responsible, they're rational, that they have rationally reached their conclusions, right? And that they are epistemically responsible. So if that's the case, if these 4 premises pass, then we have 3 deductive conclusions. So step 5 of the argument says, therefore, humanity freely thinks in the libertarian sense, right? So boom, you've got libertarian free will if these 4 premises are true. The next one, step 6, therefore, God or things like God exist. Therefore, next step, robust naturalism is false. The most common view of atheism. And then I make an abductive move after that, and it's really the beginning of a new argument. But I say the best explanation of God, things like God, and the libertarian freedom of humanity is the biblical account of reality. Okay. And in the paper that J.P. Moreland and I wrote, we put in a footnote like, hey, we're pastors at heart. So this isn't a deductive conclusion, step 8 isn't, but it's abductive. And it is designed to get us into Scripture. And I think more apologetics arguments should end with some kind of an abductive move like that to get people into Scripture.
I agree.
But yeah,
I like that. I like how it ends, and it reminds me a lot of other arguments for the existence of God. Because usually, an argument for God is going to begin with some sort of phenomenon, like there is design. We see design in the universe, so that's a phenomenon we begin with, or maybe the existence of objective moral truth. That's a particular phenomenon that we begin an argument with. And then we say, what's the best explanation for that particular phenomenon? And in this case, the phenomenon you're starting with is free will. Humans have free will. And then you're reasoning through your steps to this conclusion that it seems like God, and in particular, the Christian understanding of God, is the best explanation for this phenomenon of free will. So I like the argument. And
I would say I'm not presupposing libertarian freedom. Really what I'm presupposing here, and it's the 4th premise, is that humans are rational. We're epistemically responsible creatures. And because that's a premise that no one is going to want to deny. Yeah. So that's the starting point. Humans are rational creatures who can infer and affirm claims of knowledge. And to argue against that assumes it, and if one is going to deny it, then why should anybody listen to him, right? So that's what I'm going to start with. Everybody wants to be seen as a rational person. I'm like, all right, let's start there, and with that starting point, we can deductively conclude then that we have libertarian free will.
Well, I like that. I think it's a smart move, because even with these other arguments for God, whatever phenomenon you begin with, you've got to usually make a case for that phenomenon. So if you are saying that there is design in the universe or that there is moral truth, first you've got to make an argument for that phenomenon, and then go on to, as Tim did with his particular case, make a case that God is the best explanation for that phenomenon. So I'm a big fan of Tim's argument. I really like it. I've had him present it at our Rasha Christi ministry several times, and I want to give you guys the links to Tim's website and his YouTube channel. We'll put those down below, but I want you guys to be familiar with his work and make sure that you avail yourself to the resources that he produces. This isn't the only apologetics that he does. He does all sorts of historical and scientific and philosophical apologetics, but this is what he specializes in and what he's known for, so I wanted wanted to make you aware of his primary argument. So Tim, we can finish this video out. Just tell us more about the links and your websites and your other ministries and how people can benefit from them.
Yeah, you can find more of my work at freethinkingministries.com or freethinkinc.org. That's freethinkinc.org. Find me on YouTube, Freethinking Ministries. Subscribe, ring that bell, all that good stuff.
Nice.
And yeah, I love to speak at churches and college campuses, just like you do, and hope we can meet someday. So
yeah, well, reach out to me, and I can put you in contact with Tim, or you can reach out through his website directly and have him speak at your group or your church, and I know you'll benefit from it. So thanks so much, Tim.
but